It wasn't that they cared too much about the law or that they cared too much about moral judgment. It was that they cared too much about minor things while neglecting the weightier things, right? That they strained out a gnat while swallowing a camel. So let me back up just a little bit and give you what I think is the best mindset about the Pharisees, and that can inform your response. We need to realize that the Pharisees, the quote unquote legalists, share the same sin as those who are licentious, in that they are finding excuses for inaction. The Pharisee obsesses over non-consequential laws and moral prohibitions in order to hide from himself and others that he doesn't give a rip about what's actually morally important and fundamental. And this is what Jesus chastised the Pharisees over. It wasn't that they cared too much about the law or that they cared too much about moral judgment. It was that they cared too much about minor things while neglecting the weightier things, right? That they strained out a gnat while swallowing a camel. They obsessed over things that didn't really matter that much in order to hide the fact that they were reveling in sin that really did matter, in order to hide the fact that they didn't care about God's glory. And so the sin of the Pharisees is the same as the sin of the prostitute, in that they don't care about God's glory. In a way, the prostitute or the open, explicit sinner is just being more honest about it, whereas the Pharisee is trying to hide it by putting on a facade of caring about God's glory by focusing on small, inconsequential, moralistic things.
So there was a church that I was at the other day where I heard the pastor preaching and say something along these lines. He said, sometimes we just get too much on the side of trying to follow the law, and sometimes we get too much on the side of grace. But the answer's in the middle. And I realized that whole paradigm of balance is the answer to everything makes it so that you end up saying, don't love righteousness too much and don't love grace too much.
In fact, that means the ideal is zero love for both, right? If they're opposites and it's on a spectrum, and this is 10 for righteousness and this is a 10 for grace, and the ideal is the middle, well, you got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, until you get to 0 for both. And that's where the middle is. So that means that the ideal is zero passion for either righteousness or grace.
Let's wrap up the video with a couple of quotes that I think are relevant to us. I'm going to start with something from John Galt, and then I'm going to close out with a whole bunch of things from Paul. So from John Galt, the man who refuses to judge, who neither agrees nor disagrees, who declares that there are no absolutes and believes that he escapes responsibility, is the man responsible for all the blood that is now spilled in the world. Reality is an absolute. Existence is an absolute. A speck of dust is an absolute, and so is a human life. There are two sides to every issue. One side is right, the other is wrong, but the middle is always evil. The man who is wrong still retains some respect for truth, if only by accepting the responsibility of choice. But the man in the middle is the knave, who blanks out on the truth in order to pretend that no choice or values exist. Here is a spectrum of some of the things that Paul has said. In Romans 12, he says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. In Titus 3, he says, speak evil of no one. Avoid quarreling. Be gentle. Show perfect courtesy toward all people. But in 1 Timothy 5, he says, for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. I think that's interesting because it means that he thinks that that's consistent with what he's already said. Mm-hmm. 2 Thessalonians 3, if anyone does not obey what we have said in this letter, take note of that person, have nothing to do with them, that they may be ashamed. Do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. And summarizing the idea in 2 Corinthians 10. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. Jacob, I'll let you wrap up on this one.
I don't know that I can add much to that. Those were some very apt selections, both from Scripture and from John Galt's speech. I think the only thing I would add is that Rand talks about the man in the middle, the knave in the middle, is the rubber tube that transfuses the blood from the good into those who are evil. And so the refusal to make moral judgments, the failure to make moral judgments, not only encourages evil, but it harms the good. To do so is to discourage and actively oppose those who want to fight for what's true and good and beautiful and glorious, and to simultaneously encourage those who want to fight against what is good and true and glorious. And so that is the one place that we do not want to find ourselves, especially as Christians. And so it's important, and I would say even imperative, that we understand the value of making moral judgments and begin to really study studiously how to make moral judgments well.